Hey, welcome everyone. We're just going to give it a minute for everyone to get situated and we'll get started. All right, we'll give it just another minute, folks, to let everybody get situated, and then we'll kick off the webinar. All right, thanks so much for joining us, everyone, for the State of Staffing Survey recap, how the staffing industry is tackling 2023. Really appreciate you joining us. Before we kick things off, I just want to say, I know how busy your days are, so thanks for taking a slice out of it to join Pankaj and myself. We do love questions. This is a conversation. If you have any, please feel free to use the Q&A. And as always, if you'd like to come back and revisit anything from the webinar, we will be sure to send out a recording afterward. My name is Diana Mitchell. I'm the content marketing manager here at Sense. I kind of grew up as a marketer in the staffing industry. Back in 2010, I got started. I spent about 5 years at ClearEdge Marketing, so I may have worked with some of you. I was formerly head of digital marketing at Interim Healthcare and VP of marketing at SSI People. So before I came on over to Sense, and I'm joined by Pankaj Jindal, my co-founder here at Sense. Could you give a little introduction?
Yeah. Hi, Diana. Thanks for having me on, and thank you everybody for taking the time out to spend these few minutes with us. My name is Pankaj, one of the founders of Sense, and my entire career has been in the staffing industry. Before we started Sense, which was nearly 7 years ago, I spent 15 years running 2 different staffing companies. It's been a pleasure working with hundreds of our customers, and I'll talk more about what we've learned from them. But looking forward to the discussion today.
Absolutely. And before we dig in, I just want to walk through our agenda a little bit. I'll start off by giving you an introduction to the respondents for our State of Staffing survey. There were over 450 of them. And then I'll introduce the big theme of the survey, our big takeaway, and we'll get a little bit granular and dig into the sections of the report, the survey report that we'll be sharing with you as well. And that's the big picture, the big goals, key recruiting challenges, key sales challenges, learning and industry trends, opportunities, in other words, what to do with everything that we're talking about today, and then we'll open it up to questions. Now, Pankaj, before we actually get started, though, it might be helpful for folks to just get a little bit of information about Sense and who we are. Do you mind?
Yeah, no, absolutely. For those of you who don't know me or don't know Sense, again, we started out a little over 7 years ago with a singular mission to build the first talent engagement platform that was designed specifically for the staffing industry. We've stayed really true to that mission. We have over 800 customers now, every single one of which is a staffing company. And also, we work with several large organizations, 7 of the top 10, 90 of the top 225. Those are the largest staffing companies in the US. And the idea there is we've taken a lot of time to build relevant integrations and middleware to make sure that we can work with all sorts of systems. This is just a small smattering of some of the companies we work with, but our mission has essentially been, how do we help you grow your top line? That's the growth part of our pillar. How do we help you grow your bottom line? That's the retention part of our pillar. And how do we do this in a fashion where we make your operational efficiencies the best in the industry, make you the best version of yourself? And that's the whole idea around automation. So that's, really the pillar on which Sense stands. And happy to be here.
Thank you. And so now I just want to walk a little bit through who responded to this survey. You can take a look at the slice and dice of it all, but the big note here is that over 80% were our senior level staffing leaders. And so we're getting a representation from folks like you, leaders here in the industry. And then also taking a look at verticals, it's a pretty even split, as you might expect. The big players, IT and healthcare, admin, finance, are up at the top, but it's a really good mix. And it's especially important to touch upon this as we kind of dig into the data as well, because I think that while there's uniqueness among verticals, we'll see some overarching trends that really transcend all verticals, which is especially compelling. Most of our respondents were in the US, while some were in the UK. And I wanted to include this year because it's something that's really top of mind, but Nearly half of the staffing leaders in our survey are working non-traditional. They're either remote or hybrid, which doesn't have any bearing on it. But I thought that was pretty interesting, actually, because we're hearing so much about the return to office, and yet it seems that it's really sticking, at least for our industry, which is very interesting. So with this in mind, let's kind of dig into the big picture, right? And I wanted to lead with this, the overarching theme, as I'll say a bunch of times, and we collected a ton of data. I've been living in this data for the past few months, and I was really struck by the overwhelming optimism. 96%. Almost all of you expect to grow this year. And as I touched upon, we have to acknowledge that there are verticals that are having a tougher time. Certainly, none of us has been able to avoid the tech layoff headlines. And yet at the same time, healthcare, LI, and clerical are surging. But overall, there's more people who are optimistic than in our 2021 survey, the last time we did it, which I think is very interesting. Right, Pankaj? I mean, that time we were just coming out of COVID. Everybody was really feeling good. And yet we're more optimistic now, even with all the negative headlines. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think this was an interesting stat that came out of the survey. First of all, I mean, I probably wouldn't have expected this number, but I'm attributing a little bit to, I think people now know they've, just been through a little bit of a downturn during COVID. They've, been there before. They sort of know what to expect. I also think a lot of staffing companies digitally transformed during that time period. They actually put in technology in place. They actually put in processes in place. They actually moved their workforce to be remote or hybrid. I mean, they basically got set up to essentially be way more elastic and work based on the demands of the system. So one, I think that's awesome. Two, Diana, I think as you mentioned, part of what we are experiencing right now, I think is topical, like it's very divided by category. Of course, we work with large companies that support tech firms, and they're feeling a little bit more of a squeeze than manufacturing, retail, logistics, healthcare. Healthcare, for instance, is booming, right? So I think overall, we still hear a lot of optimism in terms of what people expect to see this year. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to be cautious about how they're managing their costs, or cautious about how exactly they're investing or de-investing in stuff. But in general, I think leaders recognize that as long as they are more efficient, more productive, they're potentially going to actually grow this year, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something really important about the elasticity within staffing and recruiting. We've been here before in a way, 2008 and came on the other side. And then COVID, I mean, it was a cratering, and
Right.
yet we came on the other side of it. It's still so fresh in all of our minds. And so, yeah, here we go. We've got this. And that's a great feeling.
Yep.
So now that we have the kind of the big picture in mind, we can start to narrow in on the goals, the big goals for our industry, and what was identified in the survey. And overwhelmingly, 71% of respondents, almost 3/4, increased productivity. And I find this interesting because it was number one 2 years ago too. And so my question is, I guess, why are we still struggling with productivity? Why haven't all of our productivity dreams been answered and we're all at peak efficiency? What's the hang up there?
Yeah, I mean, I wish it was that straightforward, but I will tell you this. I talked to a lot of staffing company CEOs, and we all talk about the same exact thing. I think I don't mean to overgeneralize it, but in some aspects, candidates and access to candidates has been very democratized, right? You can all have access to the same candidates. You pay some money to the job boards, LinkedIn, you essentially are reaching the same exact pool. There aren't hidden people, if you will, that only a single recruiter knows. You sort of have access to the same kind of jobs. I mean, obviously you're somewhat limited by which customers do you work with, but I think as people try to hire the right talent, they're absolutely more open to giving other staffing providers an opportunity or a shot at filling those positions. I think where really the companies that do well shine is how well are they taking these two essential components and running them efficiently. What's the operational efficiency of your firm? I'm sure some of you who are listening to this webinar today pride yourselves on the fact that if a candidate applies to your company, you get back to them in 5 seconds. And I'm sure there are some of you who may not admit it, but know it, that people could apply to your company and never hear back. 50-60% of those people will never hear back. Some of them will hear back 2 days later or 4 days later, so on and so forth. So, from my seat, I think for the last 7 years, I've been obviously a big proponent of how the right tech stack, how the right technology can come in and make you the most efficient staffing company. And those are the people who are definitely winning. You're going to have positions where you have to spread a really wide net to find the right person. You're going to have positions where you have to find the needle in a haystack. Hey, tons of people are applying, but I need this one particular person. I would doubt if there is anybody on this webinar today that does not use an automation platform. I would doubt if there is anybody who does not use a messaging platform. Probably some of you use even a chat bot. Some of you maybe use a referral platform. But there could be plenty of you where all of these platforms are either not integrated with your applicant tracking system, or they're not integrated with each other. So in other words, if you're running a fragmented world, it's going to affect your productivity, which, as the survey tells you, is the number one goal for 71% of the respondents. I mean, can 10 people do what 15 people were doing earlier? And if they can, that's the only way you're going to grow this year. Maybe you won't grow revenue that much, but that's how you will grow profitability.
Yeah, and I like how you touched upon the fact that, sometimes we don't get back to everyone, right? But that's the goal. And I was just reading something today that in a recent study that like 88% of recruiters expect it to be as difficult or more difficult to land top talent this year, despite all the headlines, same thing. And so hitting those marks and increasing the speed, and we did our own survey, and not hearing back from recruiter was the number one complaint. And so tightening up productivity is going to tighten up everything else. It's so powerful, but it all feeds right into itself.
Yeah, and I mean, we think about this a lot. Obviously, the role of the recruiter itself is becoming more and more complicated. We're asking them to do more and more things. So the more things that we can do for them in an automated fashion that just feeds into what their regular workflow is, the more they'll be productive for you. I mean, there is no question about the fact that it's not just a recruiter's mistake. If 1,000 people apply to your company and they can't get back to each one of them, nobody can get back to the 1,000 people. If you have the fortune of 1,000 people applying to you, it's also your responsibility to some effect to essentially have a way to reach out to those people in an automated fashion.
Yeah. And actually, that's a great transition now, because we'll talk about metrics and where the focus is. What are we prioritizing as an industry for the next 12 months? And the first two, not really surprised, right? Cost to hire, time to fill. Those are always going to be so critical. But I want to call out drop-off rate, because in 2021, that was like the bottom of the barrel. And it has surged in the last 2 years, almost replacing, in a way, revenue growth, which is fascinating to me. And so why the shift? Why is there so much worry now on drop-off?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, that's super interesting. I mean, you would expect that these are metrics, cost to hire, time to fill. Those are the kind of metrics that everybody would always worry about. But drop-off rate is just something that we are now hearing from more and more staffing companies as the number one problem they're trying to attack. We used to hear from clerical light industrial firms that for every 100 offers that they make, there'll only be 80 people who would start, which sounded just, unbelievable. Hey, you're losing 20% of the people after you've done all the work, after you've given them the offer, after they've committed to start. And now that number is actually growing up. So, this, I think for me, just highlights the need of an even more personalized white glove service, the need of making this candidate feel like you really care for them, because I mean, these drop-off rates is exactly why you're probably going to drop your revenue, because you were expecting a certain number of positions to fill and then a bunch of people just dropped off. So yeah, I mean, there are a number of tips and tricks that we can talk about, perhaps during Q&A or another time, on how you can reduce this rate. But it is interesting that this came out. I mean, if you think about it, 52, 49, 47, this is literally the number one thing companies are starting to worry about now. And I should have said this in the beginning, but Obviously, we're presenting this data to you, and there is a lot more data, and you can get a lot more data from this once you download the whole report. But please keep this conversation interactive. I mean, if you ask us questions, that is more voices that is just getting added exactly into this data. I mean, what are you seeing? What are some of your biggest concerns? This is really just a bunch of us industry professionals talking about what the industry will do in 2023.
Yes. And spoiler alert, in the report, we have also woven in resources to tackle some of these challenges and some of the goals throughout too. So I know, again, I've been living in this for the last 2 months, so I'm going to keep talking about it, folks, but we've really packed a lot of value in there. The little mark for myself there. I can't help it. I'm very proud of it. So again, getting back to the full circle, right? And productivity being at the hub, really, right? Growth depends on efficiency and productivity. And so we're going to zero in on the top performers and specifically what those qualities are that are the most common among top recruiters. And just like all the percentages, these are the multiple choice. You can select more than one. And you can see these are all very close, which I find interesting. But there's really no surprises here, right? It's about relationships and delivering on those expectations while contributing to the bottom line, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, for me, this is something I've talked about forever. A lot of people, a lot of companies have had this conversation with me where they've said, hey, does automation mean we're going to lose the personal touch? Is the recruiter no longer going to talk to the candidate? Are they going to know they're talking to a machine? Blah, 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 blah. And my answer has always been the exact opposite, which is automation is actually going to free up your recruiter to talk to people. It's going to take away the stuff that is really mundane, whether it is sometimes prospecting within the applicant tracking system, matching which candidate should be submitted where, automatically updating some fields, automatically asking people some surveys so they can actually talk. And when you actually have a conversation, that's when you can realize, how do you build a relationship with the candidate and they keep working with your organization over and over again. Just yesterday, I met with a company that has a 14% redeployment rate in the IT staffing space. And I can tell you without naming names that some of the largest customers that we work with that are in the IT staffing space and have hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue operate at 3 to 4%. So you almost expect 96 to 97% of your business walking out of the door every single year. They're going to do one assignment with you and then they're gone. And the CEO that I was talking to, one of the big things that they talked about was, hey, we have this 14% rate because one, we're very proactive in reaching out to people and saying, hey, you're ending, your assignment is finishing, here are new jobs for you. And two, just making sure that the same recruiter who placed them is having this conversation in a continued fashion, has that relationship, so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised that when you stack rank 100 recruiters in your company, the ones that are the top 5 or the top 10 are the ones that show these qualities.
I'm making a mental note for next year to cross references to the respondents who share, spoiler alert, that they invest in automation technology, because I'd be willing to bet that the percentage whose top recruiters really exude these are the ones who are able to free up the time. And I know I sound like the QVC hype man over here. Like, I swear, like, this mop is great, but really it's amazing how that comes together. And I'm seeing this as a former customer, when you see that and you can see the recruiters really shine, it's powerful stuff.
Right.
So now we've got the goals covered, the big goals, right? So let's dig into the roadblocks and the challenges and what's holding people back. And those top challenges were minimizing revenue loss due to attrition. We were just talking about redeployment, and increasing recruiter efficiency. And I can't help that there's so much repetitiveness, but it's just these core themes, right? And there's so many elements to them. And again, how it's all working together, but not really surprising. Again, revenue growth isn't quite as important. It's maximizing what we have, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this touches back on the 2 key themes we've just talked about. And it's funny how these were the number 2 responses, the first and second response in the survey. The idea that you can actually increase your revenue if you reduce your attrition is just common sense, right? I mean, it's super easy to try and redeploy somebody than find somebody brand new. This person already knows your company, is already set up on your benefits, already has relationships with your people. They probably have a pay rate that they're willing to sort of continue to work on. As long as we can find them a continuing opportunity, or even carry them out for a little bit, but then, redeploy them in another position. There are clearly companies who do a really, really good job at this. Companies who redeploy 14, 15, even 30% of their people. Some of the commercial light industrial firms where obviously the assignment durations are short. We also know companies that will redeploy 50 to 60% of their people immediately in another assignment. And then the second one, this just seems like everybody's screaming from the rooftops about it. The idea that they just want recruiters to be more efficient. And, I can completely understand the recruiter's plight. I mean, I've been in that seat for a long time. We're just asking them to do more and more. But hopefully we're not asking them to do more and more with less. We're actually automating a lot of what they were doing before. I do fundamentally believe, and if some of you have listened to me talk about this before, some of our forward-thinking customers have done what they call time studies. So they'll actually come in and study what 50 of their recruiters do for 40 hours a week for 4 weeks straight. Like, what exactly are they spending their time on? And when they compile the results of this, they'll find out that, hey, 40% of their time is being spent in prospecting, finding new candidates. 30% of their time is being spent in submitting those candidates, talking to the hiring manager, talking to the candidate. 20% is being spent in screening and scheduling, and then 10% is being spent in actually making an offer and walking them along into the onboarding, life cycle, if you will. So if you think about it, 90% of that work, I'm not saying all of that will go away like tomorrow, is automatable. You can literally take prospecting and do that automatically. You can match jobs, you can submit people, you can text them that they've been submitted. A lot of that can be automated. So that's the one way I think about recruiter productivity. And the second way I think about it is, take the best recruiter in your organization. This is the person who just does everything perfectly. Map out that person's process and now build that process as an automation journey for every one of your other recruiters. Have your other recruiters mimic what your best recruiter does, but because you've taken the habits of your best recruiter and put them in a journey. This is how many times they touch, base. This is what they say when they touch base. This is how they prospect. This is how they match candidates. All of this, your tech stack can learn today.
Yeah, and I think you're right, absolutely, that one of the reasons efficiency is near the top is because more staffing firms than ever recognize the importance of technology. And that goes back to the top recruiter qualities. I think the number 2 was technologically proficient, and they understand now just how critical leveraging that tech is to the complete picture of a successful recruiter. That's good stuff. Now, we've touched upon candidate drop-off, and so to quantify that a bit with data from the survey, the average rate is 37%. So more than a third of the effort, the time, the money, all of it is just out the door. Can you kind of just like illuminate this a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully all of you are seeing this, and hopefully some of you can add your thoughts. This is obviously a huge issue now, right? I mean, if you Google, you will find all sorts of stats that support this data now. There are stats out there that will tell you that when somebody is applying for a job, they're actually applying to 12 jobs at the same time. Like, if they're in the market to find a job, they're really in the market. They'll apply to all 12 jobs immediately, which means the job that will gather their attention is the one that gets to them the fastest. You no longer have the luxury of taking a couple of days or a day or a week to get back to them. Now, you're going to be judged by whether you got back to them within minutes or seconds, because there is going to be an organization where if you apply to a job, they'll text you right back and say, thanks for your interest. Click on this link, initiate a chat bot, tell us a little bit more about you. And they're going to ask you a few pre-screening questions right away. I can take examples from every single vertical that you might be a part of. If you're light industrial, they're going to ask you things like, are you authorized to work in the US? Do you have a driver's license? Can you pick up 50 pounds a day? Can you stand on your feet for 8 hours a day? Are you vaccinated against COVID? Will you work for exactly this amount of money? $18.37, not a penny more, not a penny less. And if you say yes, 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 you could probably get a disposition within 30 seconds and say, we think you have a job. Click here to schedule a time with your recruiter, show us your ID, go through a criminal check, and you're on. And once that happens, this person is you've probably got this person, committed to your organization. They're probably not having 12 more of these conversations. Healthcare, same exact thing. Candidates drop off because they don't work 9 to 5. When your recruiter wants to talk to them is not when they want to talk to you. So, maybe they applied, you can't get back on the same exact time, but you can certainly have them again use natural language to talk to a virtual recruiter. This concept of the chatbot that I just talked about. We saw this as the largest use case in the last 2 years that we've lived through in the pandemic, where people are actually initiating conversations at midnight, answering a few relevant questions. Hey, what kind of experience do you have? What kind of licenses do you have? Which states is it valid in? Do you have any hits on your license? When do you finish your current assignment? Can you get a reference from your manager? Boom, 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 boom. There you go. So anyway, my point is, the number one thing you can do is if you can reduce the candidate drop off from your recruiting pipeline by 90%, this 37% number will become 3 or 4%. And you'd probably have another 30% of the candidates, which probably will lead to another 30% of the fills. So it's certainly a key challenge, but it sounds to me like this is a challenge you can tackle. There is, help available, and it's probably one of the lowest hanging fruits because it is not dependent on, hey, whether there are open jobs and whether there are available candidates. There are candidates that apply to a job, they're right there. Don't let them drop off.
Yeah. And, you've been talking a lot lately about the consumerization of staffing and recruiting. And this really aligns with that, right? Like if you're in the store and you want to buy something or you're on a website, you're going to look for a coupon code, you're going to look for reviews. It's kind of the same. Like you're looking at the job and then you want that instant gratification. So you decide whether to move forward. And so it's the technology, but for staffing firms, it's like the mindset, right? And how you're viewing that interaction with the candidate. And when it clicks, and then all the tools and all of the processes come into place around it. I know I keep saying this, but really the result is so powerful, right? And it's just getting that click and then putting it all together.
Yeah. This is not a buzzword. This is the reality of today. This is the world we live in. Everybody expects a consumer-like behavior from you, just as they expect it from Amazon.com. They want you to respond immediately. I want within 15 seconds to find out if you're interested in me or not. We don't have to talk today. We can talk tomorrow. We can talk day after tomorrow, but I'm applying. Can you ask me a few questions and tell me in 30 seconds, yes, you're somebody we're interested in. Give me a disposition. Or maybe I'm the kind of person who doesn't want to talk to you during work hours. I'm letting you know my preference is to call me after hours. Please know that and, work accordingly. So we are certainly living through an era where candidate marketing has become more marketing automation. Diana, a lot of your world is this, right? But this is very much where we're essentially saying, if we're reaching out to 1 million people, they could have 1 million different preferences, and we can now cater to every single one of those.
Yeah. And one other quick thing too, is that even getting back to them immediately with a no will get you more respect, is more likely to get a referral or an apply down the line because you respected their time. So it's literally a win-win.
Yeah, no. Thanks for mentioning that. That's an interesting thing that actually I wanted to touch upon. This idea of a no is very powerful because more than half the time, candidates are applying to a job that they're not a good fit for. But that does not mean that this candidate is not a good fit for your organization. They just don't know how to discover the 500 different kinds of jobs you have open. They found a job, they thought they could do it, they applied, you kind of don't think they're a fit. But you can literally use technology now to say, wait a minute, we looked at your resume, we matched it across the 300 jobs we have open. Sorry, you're not a good fit for the job you applied for. What do you know? You are a good fit for these 4 other jobs. And some of them pay more than the job you applied for. Would you be interested? So I think a lot of us confuse, you're not a good fit with, this is the end of the road. You're just not a good fit for this role. There are hundreds of other roles. So I'm sure there are going to be some people where you just plainly have to say a no and move on. But the idea that you can actually take a good person, match their resume across hundreds of jobs, and then say, nope, there are other positions you can be a fit for is super powerful.
Yeah. And along this line of candidate drop off, then, looking at the next stat, it really works into that. And it's on average, how long does your team take to place new candidate leads from lead to hire? And 1 in 5 takes over a month. And there's really kind of no way around it. So I'll just ask you straight out, why is this taking so long?
Yeah, I mean, this is a this is a shocking stat, but I will tell you that if there are staffing CEOs on the call today, they will not disagree with this. I used to do that job for 15 years. I mean, I know that if we placed 50 people a month and we looked at their average time to hire, it absolutely was this. It absolutely was like, we started talking to this person like 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. This is how long this whole process took. So first of all, I think you can look at this and think of this as a huge opportunity, right? I mean, you could reduce this down by 50%, and that's, first of all, an incredible amount of efficiency gain. But the second thing that any of you who manage a P&L are thinking, that's 2 more weeks of billing. That's 2 more weeks of revenue. That's 2 more weeks of your competitors not being able to submit a better candidate than you. So yeah, I mean, it kind of keeps tying back to almost amazingly enough, the number one theme that we heard this year, which is, you're expecting more from your teams and you want them to be more productive.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of getting more, that was a really good transition, Pankaj. Talk about your ATS, because it's the hub, it's everything. It's probably one of your biggest, if not your biggest expense in technology, and you want to get value out of it. And so with the question, how easily are you able to find the highest quality matches for positions in real time? 70% want more value. And that's exactly the same as it was in 2021. Why do you think that is? There's no change. It's obviously a majority. It kind of makes sense, right? But like, what are the factors at play here?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I would really ask everybody on the call to tell us more. Like, you are probably the same cross section of the people that we surveyed. What are your thoughts on this? Because this is super interesting. I mean, I've seen ATSs over the last 10, 15 years, basically doubling down on doing the things that they do well, better, right? I mean, there are ATSs that were a better front office, didn't really have a middle office, didn't really have a back office. So that's what they're working on. There are ATSs that had a great middle office, back office, great at, invoicing and time card and payroll and overtime, but not really had a slick front office system. And they've been doing that. There are ATSs that were super, custom designed for healthcare, but not for anything else. So, they obviously have their own battles to fight. But we hear this a lot. I mean, people talk to us a lot about the ATS spend, and the fact that at the end of the day, you're spending a lot of money from ATSs, but how do you keep asking for incremental value from them? And that's why we partner with pretty much every single ATS, because where census value comes in, I think to some extent, is you're always going to have a system of record. It's always going to be your backbone. How do you sort of enhance that with a system of engagement that bidirectionally talks to your system of record? And what we've done over the last 7 years is execute on a vision that we had 7 years ago, which is, we're just going to keep building every single component of talent engagement and make sure it is one single platform, it talks to each other, and it talks to the system of record. So if you are still living in a world where you use a different provider for basic automation, different provider for mass emails, another one for text messaging, another one for referrals, another one from chatbot, that's probably the biggest thing you can do right now, is to essentially figure out how do you consolidate that into a single platform that talks to your ATS. So you would first of all reduce tool spend. Again, this is very interesting and timely, but I met with a couple of CEOs who told me they're probably going to be able to offload $1 million in just tool spend this year. That's $1 million that is going to fly directly to your bottom line. There is no cogs here, right? You reduce that million, goes directly to the bottom. And these are not $1 billion super large organizations. These are just everyday, mid-market companies that you and I are very aware of, 50, $100 million in revenue, but still have that kind of tool spend that they're going to consolidate on. So yeah, I mean, I see this as very much a validation of this vision that you need to understand what your system of record is and a single source of truth, which is your system of engagement.
Yeah, I know when I was head of marketing at a mid-market firm, we were able, I lovingly, well, I'll say lovingly, but refer to our system as like duct tape, because everything kind of worked together, but not really. And when we changed over, and I'm sorry, I really don't mean, gang, to sound like a hype man, but it's a personal story. When we moved over, just one functionality alone saved like 130K a year, just like one little slice. And even the total amount I couldn't even get into because I'm just from marketing, but the amount of savings, to your point, and just in maximizing the ATS investment, but then adding on so much more was really powerful. I'm sorry, that's it for my pitch. I'm just sharing my experience. And it was really powerful, right? And it's a perfect transition into key sales challenges. And at the top of the list, there's two main challenges, and those are probably not surprising: long sales cycle, difficulty differentiating. I mean, the long sales cycle, it's always been a problem. The company, the mid-market I was working at, we primarily worked at MSP. It was a struggle. I was constantly coming up with ways to try to shorten that cycle for them or to help them nurture. But why is that so traditionally difficult? Like, why is the cycle so long? And in so far as, has it changed? Like, what's that perspective? Like, what can staffing firms do?
Yeah, I'm smiling a little bit because I'll tell you that this is probably the exact slide we would have looked at 20 years ago, not just 1 or 2 years ago, right? I mean, when I first got started in the staffing industry, we used to still talk about, oh my God, it takes like 6, 9, 12, 18 months to break into a new account. And while you're trying to do that process, there is very little in forms of differentiating yourself. Every staffing company is going to tell you, I'm going to give you the best candidates at the best price in the least amount of time.
So true.
Thankfully, I think a few things have changed for sure. And again, very happy to have a discussion around this. One, there is actually now a way of proving this to the customers instead of just saying it. We have seen a lot of our customers do that. They literally will take data from our analytics module and add that data into their RFPs. They'll literally add in their RFPs and say, hey, this is how we run NPS with our candidates. This is our NPS. Our people really like us because we take care of them. And this is important to the end customer. These are things that we've done for their well-being, blah, 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 blah. This is how we up-level them. This is how we give them more training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are 3 other customers. Can't tell you the names of those, but these are our 3 other customers where we provide the same kind of people. Look at our time to fill, look at our time to hire, look at the ratios of people who are first day no-shows. These are all within the metrics or within the data that you want. So first of all, there is a way to prove this now. And secondly, I don't know how many of you use this, but we're big fans of ABM or account-based marketing. This idea that you can actually have a different strategy for every single different prospect. So how you sell to Bank of America versus Chevron versus Facebook is completely different. And you can actually do that using automation. This idea that you can send out customized journeys to these folks. And you can send these journeys in somewhat of a drip campaign fashion. They're automatically going out unless somebody responds. If they respond, you're going to ditch the rest of the journey and move them into a more qualified journey. So I'm mentioning this because obviously a lot of staffing companies right now are looking to pivot. They're essentially saying, hey, tech is slowing down. Can I do something else in finance and accounting or clerical or or sales and marketing? If you think about doing that, you might want to also think about using an ABM strategy that can actually have you stand out immediately.
Yeah, and if you have a particularly lean sales team, you can automate the nurturing. You can create. This is something actually that I implemented in my previous role, and we had targeted custom landing pages with branding, with content that spoke specifically to their pain points, and then that drip. So you can't demonstrate good service if you're not a customer yet, right? But you can, exactly right. Like you can show them ahead of time, but without adding to that mountain of work. And so like they were focusing on top of funnel and then bottom of funnel, but then that middle, they're moving them along the way. And that kind of stuff gets me super excited because then you're getting really sophisticated, and it's just that's some of the fun stuff. As a marketer, I can't help but get giddy about that kind of stuff. But
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I mean, customers actually expect to see this from you. I mean, everybody now realizes that the most important thing in their ecosystem, the most expensive thing in their ecosystem is talent, right? I mean, that's the part they spend the most money on, and that's the part that has the most bearing on whether they'll be successful or not. You have probably seen and heard this a lot. There are now companies demanding that the contractors or the temp staff that they're hiring get the same exact benefits as their full-time employees get. I mean, they want an engaged workforce. They want a happier workforce. With this whole remote workforce and hybrid workforce and gig economy, very soon, your project team is just going to look like a combination of all different kinds of resources, not all of whom, or actually very few of whom, might be your full-time employees. So the idea that, this is important to your customer. So I think it should be important to you to build a campaign using some of these traits, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I want to shift just a little bit because we're talking about the optimism, 96% expect to grow. And we've hit upon the themes of efficiency and productivity. And so I like to acknowledge that it was a little surprising to me that with so much optimism around growth, there's also the acknowledgement like, hey, in order to get there, we recognize that we have had to shift. Things have changed from as far as sales. And this is really in your wheelhouse as a sales expert. And so I'd love to understand how you think, and certainly again, to open it up to anyone who wants to chime in, how you think staffing firms should evolve. Where are the areas that need to change in order to overcome the challenges presented by reality today, whatever it kind of is? It's not really defined yet. Is it going to get worse? Is it going to get better? But how can we overcome those? And what are the pivots or the tweaks that need to happen?
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is an overwhelming number, right? 98% might as well be 100%. It's basically, we're saying everybody in the industry has changed their sales process. So that just tells you that this is a metamorphic shift. Having said that, it's not really surprising. I mean, the well-run companies, and fortunately, I've talked to several of them this month. Well-run companies are telling me, hey, we saw the data 7 months ago. In April of last year, we were basically seeing our job orders are slowing down from this particular market, or our job orders are increasing from this particular vertical. And we shifted recruiters, we shifted our training processes, we shifted the idea that, hey, we need more case studies here than there. This is happening very quickly. I mean, there are still staffing firms that are telling me that they will probably stay flat in revenue this year, even though they will see 30% decline in job orders, which is amazing. And, they're jokingly talking about is flat the new growth for this year. Obviously, that's contrarian to the 96% of the firms saying we will actually see some growth. Some companies are going to grow 5% and some are going to grow 40%. But my point is, companies are already doing this. I mean, you should, if you haven't already. There is absolutely a lot of markers and indicators now publicly available for free that tells you which industries are adding jobs, which industries are adding temp jobs, which industries are shedding temp jobs, what is the overall index of the staffing market itself, and just sort of rejig around that. Again, I kind of feel like a broken record, but these are also things that you can 100% completely automate. You can automate how your prospects are nurtured. Maybe there are prospects you had given up on because they were not within your ideal customer profile before, but they are now because you're pivoting a little bit. Start nurturing them today. And even then your sales process might take 3 to 6 months. So I think this is more a point of data for all of you. which is everybody's changing their sales process. If you haven't started thinking about it, it might be a right time to start thinking about it.
Yeah, and when we look at the next question, I think that this actually kind of points to some of this, right? How are you generating leads? How's your sales team generating leads? And some pretty interesting stuff here. Google ads, not terribly surprising. LinkedIn, and I'll get to that in a minute, followed by Facebook ads, and cold calling pretty far behind. But I like to zero in on LinkedIn because, especially since COVID, there are a lot of headlines. See, now I live in this area with LinkedIn, but the number of active users on LinkedIn has increased tremendously since COVID. And so there's so much potential. And if you do it right, it can be a huge catalyst for all the other. It can make your Google ads more successful, your Facebook ads. It can turn a cold call into a tepid call, or like there's just so much potential for all of these to work together. And it's really kind of summarizes in a way what we've been talking about just different pieces working together.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this to me, this sparked two things in my mind. The first thing it sparked was, okay, so you're spending all this money, you have all these channels, you're doing all this. First of all, let's just make sure that your expectation is that if you get a lead out of any of these sources, that you're nurturing that lead within seconds. That's our expectation, for example, within our organization. If there is somebody telling you there is some interest in either working with you or for you, that you're instantly routing that to the right person, to the salespeople, to the CRO, whatever the case might be, so you can instantly start converting these. But the second thing this tells me is, you probably can still nurture your own database. I mean, when I talk to staffing companies, it's unbelievable that oftentimes you'll see staffing companies that have worked with 300 customers over the last 5 years, but they're currently actively working with 40 of them, something like that. I mean, you get the idea. But, you can very easily nurture everybody that you were working with before and say, hey, we used to have a relationship, we no longer now. Let's rekindle that. Let's tell you some of the changes and enhancements we've made technologically, how we source our candidates, how we treat our employees, so on and so forth. So, if there are people out there who are spending a ton of money on this, and I know some people who spend a ton of money on LinkedIn and Facebook and Google, there is also an opportunity to actually nurture what is already sitting with you.
Yeah, and I'll take this opportunity to speak for the group about LinkedIn and just give you a warning. We can all probably testify, those of us who log in regularly, that there are more people using it, and especially more salespeople, because every day we're bombarded with like 20, 30 messages or the invite followed by what is affectionately called a pitch slap. So just be careful, right? Remember the human element of social and the opportunity that arises with LinkedIn. And you just want to be really careful on how you're approaching that in order to warm the cold calls and to maximize the spend that you're putting into landing pages and Google ads and all that too, right?
Yeah, actually, you should tell us more, Diana, on, I mean, how does one build a brand on LinkedIn? I mean, you're obviously an expert in that.
I have done SHRM conferences where I've gone at, we should do another webinar, but I will tell you, so improve your profile. And this is honest to goodness truth. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I have done this many, many times. I'm happy to give you advice on your profile. Update your profile, post every day, engage with content for your prospects. And so send genuine invites. Don't say anything about what you do, but go ahead and connect. Or if you can follow nowadays, people you can follow instead of connecting, engage with their content, respond, be active. Don't just go dump your stuff and then leave. And so that's the Cliff Notes version.
Okay, awesome.
And then I tagged this one in here because this is a new section this year. Again, as the marketer in charge of this report, I kind of get to put in fun stuff, but 95% of you actively stay on top of industry trends, and that's not a surprise. And the data point around that, I didn't put it in, but I'm just going to mention it, is that most of you prefer email for that, which is funny. And I'm going to use this as a microcosm of marketing in general. We still want email. People said email was dead 8 times, and YouTube is right behind it. And I want to just put this in people's ears for their own marketing. There's so many crummy emails out there. Just remember that if someone's inviting you in their inbox, there's so much that you can do with that, right? And I mean, you see this all the time. We all get tons of emails, but when it's well done, you can have a conversation from that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, staffing, I've always thought of as the one industry that is really on top of what's happening. Maybe 90% of you on this webinar subscribe to SIA Daily News, or, or news from ASA or other industry bodies. But, most people generally tend to know how much is our industry growing, if it's shrinking, which are the people who are moving where, which organization is acquiring which organization, which one's divesting. And, that's all helpful. You also are generally on top of, hey, healthcare is booming now, and now IT is booming, and so on and so forth. So we're not surprised by this stat at all. I would have expected everybody saying, yeah, I kind of know what's going on in my industry, which is very different from all the other industries. And, I'm obviously proud to be part of the same cohort. So, well done.
And shameless plug, we personally, and I'll say myself on behalf of the content team, we put a lot of effort into not only keeping you on top of the data and the trends in that regard, but on teaching and helping you do your jobs better, coming from the perspective of having been in staffing firms. And so shameless plug, because many of you cited that you like partner blogs. I encourage you to check out ours as well as our ebooks, because genuinely they're designed to offer value and help you. So that's I think I've had a few shameless plugs, but whatever.
No. Actually,
Webinar.
I think this is a super valuable plug. I mean, a lot of the content that we create is very much around educating, the industry. So I think you'll just find it super helpful. It's not necessarily meant to be a sense plug or anything. It's just a
Right.
question of where is the industry heading? What are the more successful companies doing? And the beauty of good SaaS software is it allows you to do exactly what $1 billion company is able to do. They get the exact same software that you're going to get if you were a 50 people company, but you can be just as creative and do exactly the kind of things that they're able to do. So, please leverage that.
Okay, that's another perfect transition, Pankaj, because now we get to opportunities. And this is in the report, this is kind of the what's next, and we'll give an abridged version here, right? So we've talked about the trends, we've offered insights and observations on this. What can someone on this webinar today, what do we do with that next, right? And so this is like your magic spot, Pankaj, and I love watching you talk about this. So if you can kind of like dig in and just give some guidance on what to do next with this information.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the first thing I will talk about is the thing that I feel like I'm somewhat of an expert at now, doing this for several years with Sense, is, hey, build the best tech stack. Whether or not that includes Sense is obviously your decision, but build a tech stack that makes your recruiters more efficient, that makes you reach out to your candidates almost instantly, and that makes your entire process frictionless. If you've heard me speak before at conferences, there are a couple of slides I use there. We call them chutes and ladders. You're going to see these slides where organizations come to us to map their own recruiting process, and they will tell us that there are 26 different steps in it. If somebody applies to you all the way to them getting a job, there are 26 different steps, and you can look at each one of those steps and figure out, yeah, this is an opportunity, if I can use that word, for them to drop out of the process. At each one of those steps, you can lose this candidate. And then there are pieces of automation you can put into place to say, how do I match the job? How do I refer a candidate? How do I submit a candidate? To reduce that process to 5 steps. That would reduce friction dramatically. Obviously, there are customers who are challenging us and hopefully, challenging some other providers out there to go from hello to hire in 30 seconds. Somebody could come to your website, an individual you've never known of before, does not exist in your applicant tracking system, and 30 seconds later, your organization is actually telling this person via a natural language chatbot, you have a job with us. Just, pass your criminal background check, show us some ID, but we're willing to hire you. So one huge opportunity is digital transformation. I mean, there is just no way around that. You don't control what the clients are going to want and what the demand is going to be, and you can only control so much about candidate expectations, but you control a lot about mapping them efficiently. The second thing I would say is, here is just a laundry list of stuff that you can do from an automation standpoint. This is part of the survey we ran. This will tell you, what some of your peer organizations are doing today. For all the way from 14% of the organizations using an automated referral to about 50% using text messaging for outreach. So some of these technologies are more adopted and some of them are less adopted, but every single one of these is absolutely saving you time. And most of these are things that you don't want your recruiters to do anymore. You don't want them refreshing your database. You don't want them sending out an NPS survey. You don't want them sending out scaled communications, which is, I'm going to send the same exact message to 500 people. You want them having custom one-on-one conversations, or more importantly, talk to people over the phone. So I think this is a no-brainer. Couple of examples. I mean, this is just, for you to see how we're being super transparent about who these organizations are and what they've been able to do. Here is a firm, they're saving 1,000 recruiter hours every month. That's 12,000 hours a year. That is 6 man years. I don't know how much a recruiter at this firm costs them, but let's assume it costs them $70,000-$80,000. That's $500,000 that they're going to share, get 10 to 20x the return on their automation platform, and add that money back into their bottom line. Here is another organization. We work with them, forever. They've increased their fill rates by 3x. Their conversion rate on people who would apply to them and get placed was 0.7%. And since they started using a chat bot, that has now gone up to 2%, which is almost a 300% increase. And they can do this over dozens and dozens of different positions across 80 to 90 different franchises all over the US. So certainly you guys can as well. So there is that. There is this idea of, a lot of you told us about what you plan to invest in this year. So this is already on your mind. We would love to talk to you. We would love to give you whatever we've learned from working with 800 different staffing companies about building a solution that does every single thing that you see here as a single platform. Automated text and email, candidate engagement, NPS, refresh the database, chatbots, referrals, payouts, and actually a lot more. So if you were one of those companies that are already thinking about investing in these, congratulations, you're ahead of the curve already. But this is absolutely the kind of stuff that, gets us going. I mean, we're more than happy to discuss best practices with you and tell you what you need to do to be successful. Doesn't matter whether you choose Sense or any other platform to do this, but I think you're going to see how, when everything works together, it can just create, a magical system. And then lastly, I mean, the biggest thing we talk about is analytics. I mean, the kind of analytics and data that Sense provides today could be a product by itself. You can't improve what you can't measure. And what we allow you to do is build custom analytics that make sense to you. Maybe you want to slice and dice your data by every branch, every recruiter, every customer. Maybe you want to slice and dice by, the kind of positions you fill. Maybe you want to slice and dice it by countries. Maybe you want to slice and dice it by people who are fans of different sports teams. Like, the possibilities are endless. You can slice and dice it however you like. You can do sentiment analysis and figure out of 1,000 people that you reached out to, 80 of them are talking about pay being an issue, or 100 of them are talking about communication being an issue, so on and so forth. And essentially, you can use that data and that intel to make sure that, you're fixing the right problems. So anyway, this is just my sort of top of the mind, or stream of consciousness on, I think there are plenty of opportunities here, and staffing is a very resilient industry. We go through upturns and downturns like almost cyclically. But when you get to a point where you can't control the positions the customer is going to hire for, and you can't control that much the candidate expectations, we can just be more efficient. And I think the opportunity to do that right now and transform your business is better, bigger than ever before. So,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's my little summary.
And then I'll just add that as someone who's watched hundreds of webinars and downloaded many, many ebooks over the years, taking action on, if there's anything in here that stuck with you and was like, oh yeah, or like, that's really a pain point, it's doing something with it, right? And that's the critical part. And I will say that we will get the full report out to you. It is a beast. It's 60 plus pages. Like I said, has way more questions, but if my hope is that if we inspired you to look into something more or to just change something to help keep you in line with those growth goals, and I feel like it was a well-spent hour, but I did enjoy myself anyway, right, Pankaj? I hope you had fun with me here.
This is great. This is awesome. Always, you have both of our emails. Please reach out if you have any questions. We'll be more than happy to answer. And if any of you are interested in talking about automation or just looking at what your tech stack can look like, we'd be delighted to do that as well.
Yeah, because we ran out of time for questions, gang. So please send us questions if you have them. I mean, I can answer them, I guess. If you want help with your LinkedIn profile, seriously, send me a message. But Pankaj is the guy. So if you have any questions, but thanks so much. We really do appreciate you taking time out today. We know how busy you are. We know how hard it is to stick with the webinar. So thank you, gang.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.